Thank you for tuning in to this episode of U of L's Online But Not Alone podcast. My name is Connor Makowiak, and I'm joined today by Dr. Zach Goldman of the University of Louisville's College of Business. Dr. Goldman is the Director of Online Teaching and Learning, as well as the Chair for Management and Entrepreneurship. Additionally, Dr. Goldman is a Faculty Fellow for Student Success in the Office of the Provost. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Goldman also serves as the Program Director for U of L's 100% online MBA program. The topic of today's discussion focuses on the evolving nature of MBA programs, especially in the age of AI. For more than 100 years, MBA programs have helped business leaders to develop both their business acumen as well as problem-solving capabilities. These skill sets have only grown even more necessary since the 20th century, with a recent Poets and Quants article by Mark Ether noting that a 2024 survey revealed that 92% of corporate recruiters said they plan to hire MBA graduates, up from 86% in 2023. Additional articles note that this is still the case even in the age of AI. A recent Wall Street Journal article by Lindsay Ellis reiterated this fact, noting that AI is helping MBA students to work through case studies and find new solutions when working on problem-solving assignments. Seeing these stories compared with the overall changes affecting higher education, we are met with several questions. How is AI impacting the value of an MBA degree? What role do MBA degrees play in the future, both in the short term and in the long term? What skills will emerging business leaders need to develop to remain competitive in the workplace? To explore these questions and more, I'd like to hand things over to today's guest, Dr. Goldman. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Connor. And I got to first say the title of this podcast is near and dear to the heart, and I know for you and so many people at U of L. Online but not alone, that's an expression that really resonates with me, one that I've been using for several years to describe the state of online learning at U of L. I think so much of the infrastructure and the team members and the support system that we've built into this university to make sure that online learning did not feel like this individual pursuit. It's one that very much ties people and students to the University of Louisville and the community that exists here. So the fact that we now have a podcast and I'm on it, that it's online but not alone, I'm holding in my hand a coin that we've built for the last couple of years that literally says those words, online but not alone. So a bit surreal to be here having this conversation with you, but really excited to do that. And yeah, you introduced several, I think, really profound questions about the topic at hand, which is really about AI, its impact on what we teach in the business school, particularly in our MBA program. But I would even argue more broadly than that, the impact that it's having on work and society and the way we think about productivity and outputs. And there's just some pretty big, heavy questions there that I'm excited to jump into it with you. But I guess the first one I'll try to address that you proposed, which was, what is the impact that AI is having on the MBA curriculum and how we think about the value of an MBA? I think that is the question that I spend pretty much every day in some way or another thinking about. It certainly has disrupted life in general on many levels when it comes to the way, again, we use it for our work. I suspect, I know you and I have had some conversations before off air about the ways in which we think about AI and how we can integrate it into our own work personally and how our teams integrate it in some of the work that they're doing. But I think so much more than just that. It's upending. Many of us live in an age in which the work we do and the outputs that we generate are somehow tied to information, right? And somehow connected to the fact that information in whether it be reports or whether it be certain types of outputs that we are expected to generate as individuals, as professionals, now has the ability to be completed by various AI tools. And there's so many of them out there, obviously, now. But you think about just some of the ways in which that can become disruptive, whether it be, you hear a lot of fear and a lot of uncertainty around displacement of jobs. That's kind of the top of the leaderboard of the conversation in a lot of ways. But I think even more about just the displacement of functions and why we have certain jobs in the first place, that they serve core functions in society. And now we're entering an age in which those functions are being questioned, right? Do we still need subject matter experts in fill in the blank, right? People, have certain opinions on that. I certainly do as well. But I think this really is starting to beg the question, what is the value of human judgment, of human discernment, of having humans who are in these roles throughout society that really have an important role to play in our lives, and so that's the thing about the big picture. Now, scaling that back down for a moment to the MBA, it is absolutely changing and shaping how we think about an MBA, what it teaches, what it offers, how we teach. These are all questions that are currently on the table. I'll tell you a couple practical ways that I've seen AI impact the MBA program over my time as the director of the online MBA. We've been offering now for the last several years an increasingly number of electives and courses that allow students to specialize in a better understanding of AI, especially in its impact in business. So we have a AI and business application course that we've offered for the last couple of years that really gives you a good foundation of what can it do? What are the actual things that AI can produce? And how reliable is that? And what things do I need to consider if I'm going to consider adopting and implementing tools like that in the work that I'm doing? So that's a good kind of primer course that we offer. One of the other courses that we just offered this past year is AI and product development. And you think about there's so many industries that the product, again, is some kind of information. It may be some kind of video or some kind of graphic, or it could be a number of things. It could be a podcast, right? And the idea there is like, how do you build? How do you create? How do you innovate with AI? That's a whole subgenre that has become really interesting, I think, in the MBA curriculum. But those are just two courses. What I would say more broadly across the curriculum, and as a core faculty member who teaches some management communication courses in the curriculum, I can tell you it's really challenged all of us, myself and the other faculty included, to think about what we teach, why we teach it, the importance of it, and how applicable it is in this day and age. And I'll give you just one more final example. One of the things that I teach in my communication class, and you know this well, is how to deliver bad news or how to engage in tough conversations. AI can help in some ways. It can outline your talking points. It can kind of give you an alternative point of view. It can do a lot of things that kind of aid and add value to that particular dilemma. But at the end of the day, sometimes you got to sit down in front of somebody and give them bad news. And that's hard. That's really hard. And that's human. And that's something that I think in MBA, it's not just that. It's a lot of other things like that we're still emphasizing the human elements of business while understanding and integrating the AI possibilities that are coming with this wave of transformation.
The communication course that you mentioned, I think, is easily one of the most pivotal points in all of this, especially when you think about that human-to-human connection. Full disclosure for listeners, I recently graduated from U of L's online MBA program, and Dr. Goldman's class was easily one of the most impactful, certainly in the short term and how I operate as an employee, as a worker, but also, to your point, in thinking about those broader and more intimate, I'll say, for lack of term, human connections, whether that's delivering bad news, sometimes that's delivering good news. When I think about the business world of the short term and whether, how it's been impacted by AI, I still come back to this idea and this reality that business is a human-to-human construct.
Yeah.
The success of a business is contingent upon how it interacts with its stakeholders, with its customers, with its employees. So having that skill set and having that background is absolutely pivotal. And interestingly, just in hearing some of the things you were describing with the courses too, there's kind of these competing ideas, I think, as it relates to AI. There's the term that we've all heard, AI slop, which is, that could be images or video or whatever else. But even in a professional setting, I still note that whether or not we have a certain preconceived value of what this AI response is or what it isn't, no matter what, it very quickly is becoming a tool that we all turn to quickly one way or another, at least for a first pass at something.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things that concerns me most in the broader bucket of AI, there's in full transparency, and I talk about this often, so some people have heard this before, but I try to entrench myself very much in the middle of the AI spectrum. There are people who are all in with AI, who are enthusiastic about all the possibilities and who think very little about the concerns or challenges that it may present us. And I don't need to name names. You could probably think of several that you've encountered, or public figures and others that embody that.
Sure.
There's also people who are far on the other end of the spectrum who are assuming and believe that it is the end times. It is going to be catastrophic, not just to the economy, but to just morale, society, social fabrics, et cetera. I don't go that far direction either. I think there are real concerns, just like any new technology that has presented itself. There are real concerns that we need to have conversation about, and there's also real opportunity. I was much younger at the time, but do recall a lot of the early days of the internet, and there was some of the same conversation that this new technology, this idea that we could communicate with anybody at any time and retrieve information from anywhere, and how do we know if it's credible or not? We had a lot of the same conversation then. It's much hyperscaled now about what that technology would do to society. And now we've got some time, we've got history on our side, and we can look back and say, there's some great things that came out of the internet, right? There's some technologies and some affordances and some possibilities now that have been transformative for a lot of people in a lot of communities. But I'm sure at the same time, we can look back and say, man, there's been some really terrible things that have happened, and we can draw at least some direct line to the internet as a technology that helped facilitate those terrible things. So I think we're seeing something very similar. What I think is different here with AI, there's a couple differences. Number one, the rate at which innovation is occurring here is different. It took a little while for the internet to roll out, if you recall, and you may not, but I recall it. I remember years where broadband was pretty darn slow, and the infrastructure just took some time before we could really utilize it. And even online learning is a great example. There was online learning in the 90s that exists. You can look that up. Mm-hmm. But it was not what we think of as online learning today. And part of it was just because we didn't have the internet speeds. We didn't have the capabilities. We didn't have studios like what we're setting in right now to help facilitate. We didn't have the infrastructure. And you're seeing something similar happening with AI. This is why so many people are concerned about the data centers. This is why so many people are concerned about the power and the water and all the things that are legitimate, valid concerns. Recall, I said that there's real concerns on one side that we need to consider. But it's because of the rate at which these things are happening that people, I think, feel like this is different. And I know I live in southern Indiana. We have a very noteworthy example that is being built, a Meta plant just down the road from my house. And so I know that uncertainty of what that infrastructure being built. There's questions people have in the community about, did it go through all the appropriate channels? Did it get the approvals? And that's not – I don't know enough to really speculate or comment on that, but I think that's different now. Whereas, when we built – wireless infrastructure and capabilities, it took some time. It really did. And people had more of an opportunity to understand what that effect was going to be on the community and what it meant for them from a taxpayer point of view and all these other things that are important. So I think that's different is the rate of innovation and what it's causing on the infrastructure. The other thing I would say is AI for a lot of people, and there's even some days where I feel this way, even though I try to really research and dig into things as much as I possibly can. But AI feels like a black box for a lot of people. It feels like they don't really know what's going on, how it's working, what it's doing. And history tells us anytime you have something that transformative that people don't understand, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear, a lot of poor decision-making will occur because they just simply lack information. And knowing how these models at a core level work, I think needs to be a bare minimum of how we think about and educate not just ourselves, but particularly that next generation. We were just talking before we started the recording. We both have relatively young children. We think about the fact that this next generation is really going to grow up with this technology, much like we've grown up with the internet and other things. And so the idea being that will we get to the point in a K through 12 environment where we teach a required basic AI course so that they understand how a neural network works and at a fundamental level, not necessarily the university, college level, but do they understand how information is retrieved and then how it's then redistributed and repackaged, reused, how we get generative AI? What is it generating exactly, and how is it generating that? These are just some fundamental questions that I think a lot of people – they're starting to ask. They're starting to be curious about, which is good. That's the first sign that learning is beginning to occur. But I think we need to really think about the infrastructure of how we teach AI, how we teach about AI. We need to start doing that at scale and to the same level. It's going to be hard to match it, but the same rated innovation that AI itself is growing and changing. We need to try to find ways to teach about it more quickly, more rapidly, so that people, whether they be MBA students or whether they be kindergartner students, can have some sense. Again, it's going to be different levels of learning there, but some sense of how this technology works and how we better incorporate it into our lives. And I think that's going to be something that we see over the next few years that I'm really excited about, because I think that's so much rich opportunity for people to learn.
We'll definitely touch on that in a moment, because speaking of subject matter experts, you recently just gave a TED Talk on this exact subject, learning in a lifetime of AI.
Yeah.
But before that, I am curious, from a program director standpoint, when was the first point at which AI, I guess at the student or even at a consumer level more broadly,
Mhm.
when did that first kind of come into the conversation as it relates to the online MBA? What were some of those initial conversations? And then
Sure.
just thinking about, okay, there's this new technology. How do we adapt to it? What do we do to incorporate it?
Yeah.
What were those conversations like initially? And then what would you say has been right? What would you say might be different than what you
Sure.
might have thought back then?
So I'll give you two answers to that really quickly. And the first one's going to sound like we're tooting our own horn here to an extent, but we have offered a course in the College of Business for as long as I've been there, and it's going on 9 years now. And I think the course goes well over a decade, so before I arrived. But it's taught by Dr. Nat Irvin, called Managing in the Future. And it's a course that's been available to MBA students for, like I said, well over a decade. And I'm sure some of the people listening may have even taken the course or been aware of it. But it's a course that really does look outward, that doesn't talk necessarily about the challenges of today or the issues that organizations are grappling with right now. It really is a course that looks 5, 10, 15, sometimes even 30 years into the future. What does that mean? What does that look like? How do we start thinking about that now to prepare leaders for some of this uncertainty? And so if you go back and look, and you can, Dr. Irvin has copies of these syllabi that he offered for years now. You can go back and look in 2015, 2016, some of these early courses in respect to AI where he's talking about artificial intelligence. He's talking about some of the things we're encountering right now. And I have a deep respect and appreciation for Dr. Irvin amongst many of our other faculty. But I recall, and Dr. Irvin has a track record of not just predicting the future. I'm not saying and he'll tell you he doesn't know everything about the future, but he looks at trends, he looks at patterns, and he looks at how human history is a powerful teacher of what will continue to happen again in the future. And I remember him back in like 2018, 2017, right around the time I first met Dr. Irvin. He had, and I think it's still, if anybody's still on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, it's still on his X account for those who don't believe me. But back in like 2017 or 2018, he wrote about the upcoming pandemic. And he talked about how we're not prepared for, what awaits us, in the sense that we haven't experienced a global pandemic in the age that we were at that time. And sure enough, obviously 2020 rolls around. And he was right. Our infrastructure, our supply chains, a lot of the things that we just don't even think about on a regular basis started to really get strained because of this pandemic. And not just that, obviously the health outcomes and the consequences of that, and having the infrastructure we need just from a public health standpoint. He really spoke to a lot of that 2 to 3 years before it ever even happened.
Wow.
And so that's the thing that you fool me once, shame on me. If after a while you start to realize, there's some truth to this. It doesn't mean he's a fortune teller. It doesn't mean he knows the lottery. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. But what it means is there's a pattern of behavior that we as humans have been exhibiting now for centuries, if not millennium. And one of the things that people like Dr. Irvin and the rest of our faculty do well is we study these things. We understand these things on a deep level. And when you do that, you're able to teach others and help prepare others for what comes in a relatively uncertain future. So that's one thing I would say about when we've kind of started thinking about AI in the curriculum. I'll tell you on a more personal level, when I started, really, when it kind of hit me that this is going to be something I'm dealing with for maybe the rest of my life. I remember very, very well, in fact, my colleague coming into my office, and he said, "Hey, you got to check this out." He took, I think it was a transcript of one of our meetings. We have faculty meetings all the time, and I've been chairing a lot of those meetings for years. And he had recorded one to help with some of the minutes of the meeting and making sure that we had records of that. And he had put it into, and they had just, within a few weeks maybe of releasing Google Notebook LM. So this was, I want to say like 2022-ish, around then. 2022
Wow.
was when Notebook LM came out. And he put the transcript of that in there. And for those who know Notebook LM, this is not a new feature now, but as we're talking about this, but then it was pretty surreal for me to listen to. He put it into like the podcast feature. They have like a generate podcast. And so it was a meeting that I had just facilitated, and he had put that into that software. And maybe an hour later, he comes by my office, and there's this podcast. And I kid you not, Connor, and it sounds even better now because it's improved. But even then, it sounded so human. It sounded so surreal to me that there was these two, what sounded like one feminine voice, one masculine voice. And, if those, again, who've known Notebook LM, kind of the script that it runs off of now. But we're live at this we had an in-depth look into it in a faculty meeting at the University of Louisville. And let's go live to hear some of the thought. And it was just remarkable to think, because here I am with my own human ears having a hard time discerning, knowing that there was no way somebody had actually done a podcast on the curriculum meeting that I just ran. But yet my brain was having a hard time reconciling the fact that this was artificial,
right,
that this felt real, that this felt like two human voices got onto a podcast mic and were talking. And that was when I said, okay, this technology is getting to the point where what is real, what is artificial, what is human, what is not, this will be one of the dilemmas of our lifetime, one of the struggles that we have. And obviously, years since that now, we've seen and encountered all kinds of things, from deep fakes to, whether or not, chat bots and all these things. I remember the first time, I think it was a little after that first experience, where I was interacting with a new AI system. I think it was at a Hardee's, actually, but fast food restaurants have been adopting. We have a franchise center in the College of Business, so we've been working with some franchises, and fast food restaurants have been adopting AI into their drive-through orders. And I remember a similar experience where I'm talking and almost just assuming that the person I'm talking to on the other end is 20 feet away from me, and I'll be seeing them shortly as I drive around to hand them my money. But that was an entirely AI-based conversation, and it wasn't until I got around and the voice did not match the person, and I even asked the question, and they said, "Oh no, we're experimenting with a new tool," and they actually asked, how was it? Did it sound? And so it's been those kinds of exchanges, those little moments, those little realizations that we are slowly transforming just the average everyday experiences of driving through a drive-through to the work we're doing at a university. This technology is seeping its way into really every part of our lives. And we've had it for a long time, in full transparency. Some of the algorithmic functions of AI we've been using on our phones, on our search devices, on Google, and et cetera. But most of us don't think about that as, quote, AI. It really was, I think, a turning point in November of 22 when ChatGPT launched, that a lot of people, they kind of synonymously associate that with AI, kind of like TiVo with recording devices. TiVo was only one brand, but yet it kind of became synonymous with how people recorded TV. Now we step back, it's like people assume kind of ChatGPT is AI or AI is ChatGPT. But again, that was kind of a signal to the broader market that something is changing here. And that something had been changing for years preceding it, certainly continues to change in the years that have followed it. But I think those kinds of moments, those signals, those kinds of milestones have been really key to understanding this AI journey we've been on.
I mean, you said it. I think you said November 22. I remember having conversations with different friends, family members, coworkers, and just expressing concern over, this application, ChatGPT, can write copy as well as any human. It's very good at what it does. It's still early. Of course, you have to correct it, but it's really not bad for what it is. And I remember at the time, there was a degree of skepticism of, maybe it's good, but it might take people's jobs 10 or 15 years from now, or it might have a more profound impact a decade plus from now. And of course, we're in 2026. We see how that's gone so far.
Yeah. I'll tell you one more quick story. So November 22 is when ChatGPT came out. I went to, and my daughter ended up being born shortly after that, which it's funny, as a parent, your time gets printed by your children in a lot of ways. And the reason I remember that specifically was a couple months later, we ended up going to a conference, and she was so young. My wife and I, we took her with us. And so we were out at a conference, a business communication conference, which is part of my background. And there was probably a panel where maybe 20 to 25 PhDs in business communication who spend the majority of their time assessing writing and studying how people write, communicate orally and written in written form. And I remember the conversation. This had to be like February of 2023, so a few months after ChatGPT. And the conversation was like, well, can you all really tell the difference? Basically, was the panel discussion. And again, you had a really good sample group there of people who were trained to notice the difference of what is human and what is artificial. And I would say at that point, 50-50 split, maybe even 60-40, who could not tell the difference between AI and human, right? And that was, again, 3.5 years ago. And it's only gotten more hard or more difficult to discern what is artificial, what is human. And that, again, was people whose job it was to discern it. Now you think about all the people who don't study writing or who don't think about that. And that's just one output of AI. But it goes to show you that concept I was telling you about, the discernment between what is human, what is artificial. Do we even notice the difference? And if we do notice, do we care about the difference? That's a whole nother set of questions that we could dive into. But I think that's what's really been most interesting to me in my background is studying that because, I think there's certain times where we absolutely do care about the difference, right? And I'll give you an example. If something tragic or terrible happens to you as a human being, the loss of a loved one or an illness or something that just was, very, very hard to deal with, and somebody sends you an AI-generated email, you're immediately going to have some dissonance about that, whether
Right.
you are okay with it or not. Like, well, this is kind of weird. I got this automated AI email about the loss of my father or whatever it may be. I think that kind of example reminds us that communication and the way we interact in any capacity, there is a humanness to it that we've probably taken for granted for a very long time. And now that we're in an age where I can outsource essentially just about anything cognitively that I'm capable of doing, there is a world in which I can outsource it if I'm willing to invest in the skill or the development or the time or the money or the models. I can outsource it. But now we're entering and it's really fun to see now in 2026. I say fun because as somebody who studies this, it's fun because you see brands now that are leaning in the opposite direction. You see certain brands that are emphasizing the human, right? I saw a commercial the other day of, I think it was one of the banks, I forget which one, but one of the banks have a new commercial that talks about human, being human, and how you want to come in and talk to a human teller again and a human banker. Like 4 or 5 years ago, the thought of that would just be so foreign to myself and you and anybody else listening. And now we're like, yeah, I can see how that would be a marketing strategy. I can see why people would want to go in that direction because if I'm tired of all the stuff, if I don't want to speak to another chatbot, if I just want to see Connor and talk about something that he's my insurance agent or he's whatever, like there is a value in humanness. And we're seeing this interesting paradox where, yes, AI is creating all kinds of opportunities, but now there's kind of this rise of remembering and valuing what humans offer each other. And that are things like trust and care and dignity and respect and things that, again, many of us, my colleagues in management entrepreneurship, my faculty have been studying this stuff for years. They're seeing the same effects in their respective areas, that humanness is having a rebound in some ways that I think are really interesting to study.
One of the MBA courses, I want to say it might have been corporate finance that we had this particular case study, but it was a prompt that it postulated, pretend you're the VP of a bank. I think it was one of the Asian banks, one of the larger ones, and you're getting two inputs. There's one suggestion that, hey, go ahead and replace. I think you could replace in this example 60 to 70% of your workforce with an AI chatbot. Do you do that? Do you not do that? Do you do that to a degree or to an extent? And it was a case study. How would you proceed? And I remember my own answer as well as, an answer that many of my colleagues eventually arrived at was that, no, you don't want to do that right away necessarily. You don't want to do it that fast because that'll turn a lot of people off. But you kind of have to at some point to remain competitive. And this was back in 24, early 25 when this prompt came about. Now, having said that, at the time, I remember thinking, kind of to your point, even 2-3 years ago, this concept would have been foreign. I remember in that moment thinking the correct answer is roll this out slowly.
Yeah.
Personally, part of me feels like do this as quickly as you can because Chase, Goldman, any of the other major banks, B of A, are very likely doing this to some extent or another. So how do you remain competitive? But yeah, I think that the human-to-human element is a very powerful, unique selling point because who wants to do business with this is just an AI company?
You used a couple keywords there that we talk about a lot, and I love hearing that out of an MBA alum's mouth now. But the idea of competitiveness, and I think you mentioned even efficiency in there, which sometimes those go hand in hand. To be more competitive, sometimes you have to be more efficient and get more out of fewer resources in many situations. And I think that's so true. I mean, that you think about some of the biggest businesses and some of the most successful operations in any industry. I would argue almost all of them have to be efficient, especially as you're scaling, as you're growing. The Apples of the world, they're efficient. They understand how to be an efficient business and to maximize. They have a lot of inputs, they have a lot of resources, they have a lot of dollars that they invest into their infrastructure. But because of that, they're able to output, millions and millions of phones and devices and softwares and all kinds of other things that Apple produces. And they are certainly just one of thousands of examples that we can refer to who balance that competitiveness and efficiency side of things with some degree of humanness, right? There's a reason why the Tim Cooks of the world, or before him, the Steve Jobs of the world, why they go up on those stages and still talk about new products and vision and all these other things. And it's because people resonate with that. They don't resonate with the efficiencies. Yeah. Efficiencies are necessary in business. They have to happen. You can't run. We are both employees of a University of Louisville. It's a large organization. It's got thousands of employees. There's a lot of people who are connected to this organization. There's even more students and alumni and everywhere else across the world. You have to be efficient. You can't run an inefficient university of this size and do so very long, right? There's a competitiveness to the fact that there's a lot of schools out there. There's a lot of opportunity out there. But at the same time, if we lose, and this kind of leads into that TED Talk that you referenced, if we lose what is really our core offering, our core values, which is this relational component that is essential to not just business more broadly, I would argue specifically in the business that we're in, which is learning, right? Teaching and learning and the idea of transformative education, that flows through human beings, right? Case in point with online learning, it is an incredibly powerful opportunity that we've been presented with over the last several decades to be able to expand learning into the online platforms in a variety of ways. But I would argue the most successful programs that exist, and I've studied these, I've researched these, I've tried to make sure that at least with the online MBA, we're always in that ballpark, is those programs also still recognize and still find ways to elevate the human value, even when you're online, which is why, again, I go back to the title of this podcast, Online But Not Alone, is such a unique proposition of online. Let's put the comma there for a second. Well, now I've got flexibility. Now I have convenience. Now I can be a parent and still get my degree, or now I can take care of a loved one and still potentially invest in myself. That's incredible. And if we said nothing else, that would be a remarkable achievement that over the last several decades, higher education has embraced online learning as an accessible and convenient offering to still invest and develop one's own potential and growth through that of education. But then the comma and the subsequent part I think is so important because baked in that online is what we've seen more broadly in society, which is we've been connected to everybody in some way or another over the last several decades through our devices. Like if I want to, I've got a buddy who lives in Dubai. I can text him right now on the other side of the globe. That is so remarkable, right? Sometimes we lose sight of how remarkable that really is. And yet we see, and we've known for years now, depression levels, isolation, so many other variables that connect to this idea of being alone are at a very high level, in some cases higher than ever before, right? Depending on what demographic you're looking at, what parts of the country you're looking at, what parts of the globe you're looking at. And so this idea that we are online and connected, but so many of us feel alone, I love the idea of inverting that, right? And leveraging the strengths and the convenience that is online learning, but also recognizing that it comes with a cost, and we're not going to allow that cost to be detrimental to our students or to our learners or to our faculty or to our staff or to anybody else who's connected to these programs. That's why I love the expression online but not alone. It acknowledges what is both the strength of online learning while also saying we're combating what is really the potential threat to online learning, which is a bunch of people in their own little corners of the world trying to learn independently and yet not connecting with each other. Because again, that really is, I think, the way learning works is through our connection with each other. We can all probably close our eyes and think about a teacher, a professor, a mentor, a colleague, a peer, somebody who helped crystallize something for us, who helped us learn something at a high level, who helped us understand something that we didn't think we could understand. It's because of the human connection. It wasn't because our brain wasn't capable, right? You can now see and like, oh, I understand this formula or this theory or whatever, but somebody took the time to push me past that initial pause, that initial resistance, that initial uncertainty, that initial disbelief. I don't know that I can do this. Mentors, peers, colleagues, others guide us to that higher level of learning that we're all capable of in the right hands, in the right environments, in the right opportunities present themselves. And that's what I think is so fascinating about learning. That's what I've studied for years and why I think this idea of growth and development is universal. We all crave it. We all want it. We all need it. We don't all need college degrees or graduate degrees. I understand that. But at the same time, like the human brain is meant to expand. The human brain is meant to grow. And the moment that it stops, I think is a really challenging moment for a lot of people.
Yeah, I'll say this, and then to your point, I'm very excited to jump into your TED Talk. U of L's online MBA program does have a cohort-based model, and the benefit of that is that obviously you get your larger cohort as a whole that you get to connect with, but you also get these smaller working groups. And throughout the coursework, to the exact points that you just raised, there were plenty of times where I get home from work late and I have a few hours ahead of me that night, or there's a concept that I'm really struggling with, or a presentation that I wasn't certain about. And there were so many times where connecting, even just with our smaller working teams, those were some of the best parts of my week.
Yeah.
Just getting to connect with people and share that experience of here's what we're going through, here's what we're learning, or even, and this was a really cool thing, taking some of the concepts that we learned in the program in the fall or in the spring, and then using it later in the program. There was one point where I caught myself and our group using MBA parlance, the language of business. Suddenly it was like, hey, I really don't know what to do about this. It's a stakeholder analysis. Don't overthink it.
Yeah. No, I think that's such a great point, and I'm glad you brought up the team components because I hadn't really mentioned that yet. But what I'm saying here feeds into everything that we do. We have an entire strategy, as you know, based on community, that it really does feed into how we design the teams, how we think about assignments, how we think about the ways in which the courses are structured, because it's a challenging. Any graduate degree, to all my colleagues out there in education and all the students who may listen, any graduate degree is a challenging endeavor. It is. It is not for the faint of heart. It is not something that we in academics, we pride ourselves, and it's a high bar that we set, especially at the graduate level. We set it at the undergraduate too, don't get me wrong, but the graduate degrees are so, I think, profound because of the rigor and the investment that it's required to get one. I mean, anybody who's earned an MBA, in my book, they immediately have my respect because I know the work that goes into that. I know the effort. I know the time. I know the commitment. I know the persistence. I know how many chances you had to drop out as a student. And as our alumni, I know how many moments you probably thought about that, where it's like, maybe this isn't the right choice, or maybe, the way we trick our own brains, maybe I'll just take a pause, maybe I'll just delay, or I know that. And yet those who finish, I know what their character's like. I know what they're built of. And I think I'm not the only one that knows that. I think most people who have been around or who know what the graduate degree space requires, and an MBA is certainly a big part of that, knows the investment that it takes. And so we do believe that teams and collaboration and support and community, they all are part of that infrastructure, because I think, when we look at this holistically, that's what's going to get people not just to the finish line and get them to graduate, but it's going to get them to a point where they really understand the value of what they've learned, and they really can take what they've learned and then go and put it into work on Monday morning, or they can take it into their communities and use it to expand, all kinds of opportunities for people around them. Those are the things that I think really make the MBA and just graduate degrees in general such a service to the world, really, but especially to workplaces and communities and places that really, the graduates of these degrees go back and work and be a part of.
Well, speaking of community, let's go ahead and jump into your most recent endeavor, which was that TED Talk. I believe we're recording in June of 26. I think this TED Talk happened in May, I think, or
Yeah, a few months ago, just posted not too long ago, though, a week or two ago, I think. Yeah.
so share a little bit about that experience. I guess what were the things that you wanted to communicate? What were the things that really stood out to you as being critical, especially when you consider the topic of learning and leading in a lifetime of AI? What were the main points you wanted to communicate to people who listen? And how do you think that kind of encompasses what we're talking about with this emerging focus on AI as it relates to graduate education?
Yeah. No, it was. Hmm. It was an incredible experience, but on ways that I wasn't necessarily anticipating. So a couple things contextually, and then I'll share just two or three takeaways. But contextually, I gave this talk at my alma mater, my undergraduate alma mater, not too far down the road here at the University of Southern Indiana, which is where not only did I go to school, I met a lot of my friends that I've had, for decades since, and I met who would become my wife. I met her there on that campus of the University of Southern Indiana. So it was special for some of those reasons that I just wasn't fully anticipating. To be able to, it was my first time back on campus in over a decade. It was a chance just to, take my son to kind of show him where I met his mother and just some of the experiences that I had at a much younger age that he just wasn't around to witness or see or be a part of. And so, like, that part was really special. And on top of that, my parents were able to come and just to see kind of the full circle moment there was really cool. And especially because my parents both, and really the topic of family and relationships were integral to what I talked about. I spent the first few moments talking about how, as I was growing up, which again, very different time period in terms of technology, in terms of how we thought about learning and how we accessed information. But I shared the example of a traveling salesperson who sold my mother a set of encyclopedias, which is a true story. And he sold her a set of encyclopedias that under the premise or under the pitch that, basically that I would need the information from those encyclopedias if I was truly going to learn at the highest level. And man, did that stick with me, and not because I always use those encyclopedias. In fact, I joked, I think, in the talk that I'm pretty sure I only really opened them up 4 or 5 times my whole lifetime. It was not a good financial investment. What it was, though, was a signal or an indicator to me that, you need other people to invest in you, be willing to invest in you. And not always financial, that may be part of it, but to invest their time, their effort, their energy, their belief, their care. I don't believe, and in fact, if you go around and survey, and there's been some work in this space that has, but if you look at people who earn PhDs or master's degrees or even college degrees, high school diplomas, it really doesn't matter what spectrum you're looking at. The people who are successful in completing those pursuits and earning those credentials, typically, not always, there's always an exception out there, and those are the ones that are also really inspiring in their own ways. Typically, these people have people behind them. They have people beside them. They have people supporting them. And sometimes it's a parent. Sometimes it's a loved one. Sometimes it's a sibling. Sometimes it's an aunt. Sometimes it's a neighbor. It doesn't matter as long as there are other people investing in your learning and who care about you and your growth. That is one of the biggest predictors of success in any academic environment. And so one of the things that I was really trying to share in that talk was that, yes, we are now living in an unprecedented age of information acquisition, and that I can type a prompt into ChatGPT right now as I sit here in front of you, and I can acquire information that a generation before me could have never fathomed. And we just sometimes need to pause and think about that. Like, we have built for centuries infrastructures and opportunities, libraries, these immaculate resources as societies and civilizations to curate information, to gather information. I mean, we have places like the Smithsonian and all kinds of others here in the United States even that do a similar job of trying to curate, protect, and preserve not just history, but information, what we've learned, how we've grown, how we've evolved. And now we have that at our fingertips. We have that at our fingertips. You can learn anything that you want to learn. You pick the topic today, you could have an entire lesson plan built out for you on your phone within minutes. That's truly profound. And yet one of the things you and I were talking about before we started this recording is that technology in and of itself has not enhanced the human ability to learn. Case in point, my generation is probably subject matter one on this. My generation came up with the internet, more or less. The example I shared about the encyclopedias, I also shared shortly after, I think I was 7 or 8 years old, Google launched, right? The internet was being built as I was a child. And by the time I reached some of my formative years, I had access to information that, again, the predecessors of mine would have never had. I think my generation was one of the first. We had a keyboarding class, in our K through 12. So the infrastructure was being built with my generation in mind as we got into this new age. And now here we are. I'm seeing history in some ways repeat itself. But my generation, objectively, and stepping back and looking at data, across the globe, not just here locally, we're not any smarter than the previous generation. Well, wait a minute. We have information that they never had. Shouldn't we be smart? We have at our fingertips, again, this powerful tool we just talked about. Why aren't we performing better on name whatever standardized test you want, name whatever objective measure, tool, metric that you want. We don't see performance gains from access to technology in terms of learning performance. And that worries me. That troubles me because basically what we've said and what we've known is that simply by using these devices, they're not actually helping improve or elevate our human cognition. In fact, you can search the headlines and you're going to see versions of our smartphones are making us dumber, right? And smartphones are lowering our IQ and all this other stuff. And some of that's true and some of that's kind of headliney. But the idea, though, is that we don't see really any real evidence that these technologies and these devices and the access to this plethora of information has made us collectively or even individually in some cases smarter. What we do know is that some of these very traditional models of education are traditional for a reason. They've endured. They've withstand the test of time. The idea that going all the way back to your Plato's and your Socrates, that sometimes people roll their eyes when I say this, but it's like, we've got centuries now of educators, of philosophers, of others who have taught us and who have shared with us that we learn best through mentors. We learn best through relationships. We learn best through each other and through our experiences. And it's through those experiences that we actually find some shared meaning, right? That there is some objective truths that we can come to, but we have to understand points of view. We have to understand perspective. We have to understand realities as they are construed, and that those realities can coexist and that we do have more in common than we have that separates us. But it's through communication, through learning, through all these other things we've been talking about. And so that is kind of contrary to this rise of AI, because AI limits to some extent what I'm experiencing with other humans. And so that's why when I go back to where I stand firmly entrenched in the middle because I've seen the possibilities that people who understand how to use AI and know how to use it well, man, their future is bright. The things that they're doing and unlocking and the possibility, you're talking about a whole new world of thinking about work in ways that are really exciting for some people. Again, on the challenge side, I worry that some of the trends we've seen from the last 20 or 30 years are just going to be magnified. They're just throwing fuel on what was already a fire in that, if we outsource, and this was something I mentioned in the talk, if we outsource our critical thinking as human beings, I think we're done. I really do. And I don't mean that in a doomsday, apocalyptic type of way. I mean, we're done in the form of elevating our species, right? Elevating who we are and who we've become because we really do. We need critical thinking in more ways than we can fathom. Every day, whether we realize it or not, we use critical thinking skills. We're processing information at a rapid rate, and we don't even realize we're doing it. You think about driving a vehicle as just a quick example. Anytime you're driving a vehicle, especially at a relatively high speed, say 60 miles an hour, there's so many things that could potentially go wrong. And your brain is monitoring the majority of those things, sometimes just subconsciously. That's why when you see something out of the corner, you're like, oh, crap. Your brain is working and you're not even thinking about it working. Well, that's critical thinking skills. It's not in the traditional way of critical thinking, but it's expanding your ability to process information. It's storing that information in places that can be quickly retrieved so that you can make quick decisions when necessary, and you can also make slower decisions when you need to contemplate something. Daniel Kahneman writes about this in his book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, and I think it's such a great illustration of why we need our human brain to continuously expand, because when we stop, again, that's when problems start to happen in our lives. And that's when, societally, we start to deal with a lot of challenges as well, in that we can't always discern fact from fiction, truth and reality. These concepts, which do exist in some form, they are hard to identify. They're certainly hard to agree upon when we don't have the critical thinking skills that we need to function as a group of people.
Critical thinking, decision making, and I also think about the word that you used at the very beginning of the TED Talk, that term and that idea and that concept of investment, right? Something I've talked a lot with my friends about lately is not just investment, but this idea of intentionality.
Yeah.
And to your point, we can prompt our phones right now to generate the best playlist we've ever listened to. We have access to any kind of data or information or whatever else you could realistically conceive of. We have access to it in seconds.
Yeah.
So knowing that, how do we live in an intentional way with and around that? And I think about I think about learning as it relates to, especially with the MBA program, especially with AI. And there's this prevailing sentiment that seems to continue to emerge. Yes, AI is here. It is going to have an impact. It already has in many ways. What are you going to do to prepare for it in the meantime? And I think so many, and I think about the kind of individual who is attracted to an MBA program or who is attracted to advancement and development and furthering their life through education, through career success, and through personal development. And I think those kind of people, to your exact point, see AI and recognize, okay, it's here, it's going to make a difference. How will I use it?
Yeah.
How can I use it to facilitate my learning? How can I use it to take a first pass at something?
Sure.
So in many ways, sure, I think it'd be very easy for people to feel a sense of gloom or doom or confusion about what the immediate future may hold. But in many ways, it's also just as bright as it ever was. But you still require that personal investment, that personal sacrifice with the belief and the commitment and the knowledge that it will pay off down the road.
Yeah. And there's a couple analogies that I would use to try to, pull all this together for us. I mean, AI fundamentally, even though as transformative as it is, and even I am guilty of this. We've done it on this podcast. We refer to AI as almost a singular concept or entity. The reality is it's a plethora of technologies and tools. It is a variety of different resources that exist, and some of them are commercialized and some of them are just embedded into things that we use every day. But the reality is it's not a singular idea. It really is complex. But the reason I mention that is because, like any set of tools, right, and I do think a lot about this type of analogy, it's a big, big toolbox. It's a really nice toolbox. It's got some really nice tools in there, and it can do some really incredible things. You pull out a wrench or a socket or whatever, and you don't know what to do with it. It's just like, I'm holding a wrench. Like, what? And it's like, you have to still have not just the fundamentals of a discipline or an area or a knowledge base, but enough of that fundamental that okay, well, the wrench can't do this, right? I know I need a hammer for that, or I know I need this different tool for it. You have to be able to discern not just what a wrench and a hammer can do, but when is it the right time to put that wrench or hammer down, and you can just sit there and beat on something with a hammer until your arm is exhausted, but is that going to get you the outcome that you're looking for? It's like you have to know how, okay, nope, let me step back here. I'm using the wrong tool. Or actually, I don't even need a hammer or a wrench. I need to use my fingers. I need to actually screw this thing on myself and make sure it gets threaded properly. Again, I'm using all kinds of analogies because I think human history and our shared lived experiences can teach us more about what AI can do than what AI can teach us. In fact, I've just said this a few minutes ago, but I think it bears repeating. We are in the MBA program trying to teach our students about AI and how to use AI. Where I draw the line personally as program director, and where I think a lot of my colleagues agree with me, is that we do not believe that AI will teach us, that AI has some unique human value or experience or perspective that we can genuinely learn from. Now, we can use it to teach as humans. Like, I can build a custom lesson plan in 15 minutes, and then Connor and I can sit down as a student and a faculty member. We can go through that plan, and some of it may be helpful, and some of it may be the slop that you mentioned earlier. But it's still two humans using a tool to better improve their learning outcomes. I think the moment we lose sight of that, and the moment that we are thinking and positioning AI in ways, in particular in the learning environments, but I would even say in professional environments all over the world, the moment we start thinking that AI can teach us and that we are not inputting constantly what these models and how these tools are working and using and building from, then the whole thing falls apart. The whole thing just becomes kind of a silly exercise at that point in terms of human futility and human hubris, in the sense that it's like we are still at the top of the evolutionary food chain. And I know there's some people out there who feel like AI is the first real threat to that in some respects. I don't go that far. I think that these are still very much tools that, while they are incredibly impressive and they can do some remarkable things, and trust me, I've seen the depths to which it can work, I still fundamentally think that they are tools to be used by humans and that they need to remain that way. And you'll see that come up in education over the next several years. In fact, you see this right now. I just saw a higher ed article where it was talking about California state systems where they had invested, I want to say close to like $16 or $17 million in AI. And somebody can fact check me on that. But the idea is like when we get to that point where we're investing more in AI than we are in the students, or more in AI than we are in our faculty, that to me will be the real worrisome sign. And I know that at University of Louisville, we believe too much in the faculty and the staff and the students and all the people that are part of this university to get to that point. To prioritize AI over humans is something that feels dystopian, that feels unrealistic to some of us in some places. But we're seeing some places elsewhere where that is, in fact, at least starting to occur. And those are the organizations that I think are really going to struggle in the next couple of years.
You've already touched on this a little bit, but just hearing you say some of this, what are some of the things you'd want to communicate to a prospective online MBA student, someone who's thinking about this program or any MBA program for that matter? What are things you would want to share? What would you want them to know about this program, both in light of everything we've discussed today, but also from some of the other angles that we might not have considered or discussed?
Yeah, prospective student or not, whether they are part of our program or not, I think that the biggest takeaway from this conversation and just from the work I've been trying to do for the last several years is never quit learning. Like, just truly never stop. If you feel like you've learned it all, go find something else to learn. I promise you there's more out there. I promise you that. I've got a great mentor and colleague who says, when you exhaust the learning curve of either a position or a role or anything else, then it's time to look for the next one. And I think that's true about life in general. Like when you've exhausted the learning opportunities in a certain space or in a certain time, maybe you've outgrown a position or maybe you've outgrown, an opportunity. And some people can get sentimental about that or sad about that. And I understand those emotions. But I think for me and for what I try to advise people who have any interest in what I have to say, which is just to not stop learning. Like that is truly the best advice I can give. How the online MBA fits into that? Well, I think in a couple of ways. One, we believe that. We embody that. Our faculty believe that. We continuously invest. I mean, we have faculty, and people get kind of a misconception sometimes about faculty in the summer. It's like, oh, yeah, we're just all sitting on the beach. Yeah, the most faculty I know are not sitting on the beach. Most of them are, diving back into their research. They're diving back into continuously learning. And that's what I love about being at a place like U of L. It's an institution that believes that embodies that who we are today is not who we will be 5 years from now. And that's pretty special. And there's some organizations who, go find your Blockbusters and your BlackBerries and the things of the past. They didn't believe that. That they believed what they had is good enough and never stop or that we can kind of be content. Whereas universities, the reason why I think they've endured, this is a 225 plus year institution. The reason we've endured is not because we've always had the best budget or we've always had the best resources or the best geographic location. None of those things are why we're still here. We're still here because we are an institution that values learning. And when you value learning, you're willing to adapt, you're willing to grow, you're willing to embrace change, you're willing to accept realities that 5-10 years ago may not have seemed possible. If you would have told me 10 years ago, Zach, you're going to be on a podcast talking about AI, you're going to be talking about all this other stuff, about the TED Talk you gave on AI, I'd say that's just not something that I would foresee happening. But when you take that learning mindset, you are opening yourself up to opportunity. You're opening yourself up to being to growing into somebody that you didn't necessarily think that you could grow into. And that's something that I think is really special. The last thing I'll say about the online MBA program is that this is a program that we truly believe is accessible for various reasons. So a couple of things when I'm saying accessible. We're an asynchronous program, and so students can complete this program with a variety of different time challenges and constraints and other things that are going on in their lives. There's still some synchronicity in the sense that you work with teams, and that's on your schedule, and you coordinate with your colleagues on that, but there's still some interaction that occurs in real time. But all the deadlines, all the due dates, all the requirements are still asynchronously oriented. So that's accessible for students who have all kinds of schedules and all kinds of commitments. The other thing I would say about accessibility is affordability, price. We are one of the most affordable online MBA programs in the ACC. And that is something that we take a lot of pride in. We try to keep our costs to the point where we know this institution, we know this community, we know the people that we're serving. It's not the richest group of people. It's not some of your Ivy League schools that can charge hundreds of thousands of dollars in tuition. We just simply don't do that. And so I do believe that our tuition price is affordable. We have competitive scholarships. We have a lot of opportunity to try to get people, even if they don't think they can afford to go back to graduate school. I would advise them to have a conversation with us, have a conversation with our mission team, have a conversation with me or anybody else who serves in these leadership roles, because I think they'd be surprised with the types of opportunities that we have to try to make this more affordable and accessible to students from all types of backgrounds. So between affordability, between accessibility in terms of the timing and the convenience of things, I think that those things plus the fact that we truly are a program that tries to connect people with where they're at, and so we will sometimes have events and or opportunities to connect with people from throughout the state of Kentucky, throughout Indiana. We try to definitely focus on this region quite a bit, but I have hosted events, and I think you've even helped coordinate some of them, Connor, in the past of hosting events in Atlanta, Georgia before. We've had events a couple years ago. We had a group of online MBA students meeting up in California. We've had students down in North Carolina. I mean, those are the stories that I love hearing and sharing because this program, I didn't share it before, but it's only now in its seventh year. It's still relatively young by academic program standards. We launched in 2019. I've been the director of the program since really the beginning. I was appointed in early 2020. And so we've just been growing, in a variety of ways over these last 7 years. But what I think is most exciting is the footprint has grown in terms of the alumni, the work they're doing. Almost now I think we're over 1,000 alumni as of this most recent graduating class who are spread really throughout the globe. We've got alumni and students all over the world now from this program. That to me is just so rewarding. It's so encouraging. It's so exciting to see that many of them still connected to each other, many of them still on group text or conversations with their teams or their cohorts. That's part of what I really love about the online MBA and what I really love about the University of Louisville's online learning community.
It's worth noting, too, that you get that much value out of a program that is currently one of the top online MBA programs, according to U.S. News and World Report, and was at one point ranked in the top 40. I know those rankings change every single year, but still one of the premier online MBA programs and one of the most affordable in the ACC, to your point. Before we wrap up, do you have any closing thoughts or anything that we haven't discussed yet?
No, other than just to say my thanks to you, Connor, and not just for this conversation, but for the work that you're doing all the time, and that the team here at the University of Louisville and the Delphi Center and so many others do across campus to support online learning and support the university. The idea, again, I go back and I think it's such a fitting conclusion of online not alone. I think I've said this probably thousands of times in all honesty over the last several years, and it's something that is much more than just a catchphrase. It's much more than just a slogan. It's much more than just something we print onto a coin. It really is something that I know for myself, and I think I speak for our team, and I speak for the faculty, and I think I speak for many at the University of Louisville. We believe in it. We really do. We think that learning is not an individual pursuit. It's not something that we can do in isolation. If it were, we'd all have, doctorates in whatever subject matter we found most interesting. The reality is learning is a shared pursuit. It's one that requires relationships, mentors, peers, colleagues, support team members, staff, faculty, you name it. I mean, there's a reason why universities are built the way they are. And it's because these relationships and the importance that they have are undeniable on what the outcomes, how we shape the outcomes. And so to see now being into this, I guess, 7th plus year of the online MBA, and to see all that kind of into fruition, and know that we still have a lot of excitement ahead of us. Again, we believe in a learning mindset. So I don't know. I have some sense. There's a few things we're working on that we'll disclose in due time. But to not know exactly where the program will go, where it will be in a few years. Some people that may be uncertain or anxious, but for me, it's exciting because that means we're open to following, what we need to follow, following our community members, following our mission, following our vision. And sometimes that requires us to change. And I think if we really believe that, if we really embrace that, not only will the online MBA program endure for a really long time, University of Louisville and everything that we care about will continue to endure because that's a value that is timeless.
I couldn't have said it better myself. All right, thank you all again so much for your time, and thank you to the listeners for joining us for this discussion. The University of Louisville offers over 70 online programs, which include bachelor's, master's, doctoral, and certificate programs designed to allow you to complete your degree on your schedule. There are transfer credit and scholarship opportunities available for many of our online programs so that you can save time and money on your education. If you'd like to learn more about the Online Master of Business Administration, you can click the links in the description of this episode, or you can learn more at uofl.me/obnapod. Again, that's uofl.me/obnapod. Additionally, a link to Dr. Goldman's TED Talk will also be available in the description of this episode. Thank you again for tuning in to the Online But Not Alone podcast. When completing one of U of L's online programs, you may be online, but you'll never be alone. Thank you again to Dr. Goldman for joining us, and I hope you all have a great day. See you all in the next one.